Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for allowing us to share in this experience with you. My name is Lan, and this is my daughter, Harlan Margaret.
And we're a mother-daughter team who recently wrote a book together.
It's called Family in Six Tones, and it came out of an interview we did in 2018 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Tet Offensive. And it was aired on NPR for StoryCorps, and it had Harlan interviewing me. So it was very interactive and very conversational. And when we wrote the book together, we decided to use that same format, a dual voice, interactive, conversational, like a dialogue, with alternating chapters between mine and hers. I was basically born into the war. The war had already started, and most of the fighting never took place inside Saigon, which is the capital city where I lived with my parents. It was more or less on the outskirts, but there was always a feeling of danger lurking. And one of my most searing memories had to do with my mother explaining to me why it was that my father was sewing cyanide pills into the shirt hems of his military uniform when he was getting ready to go into battle. And she said that in case he was captured, that he would be able to bend forward if his hands were manacled to bite the cyanide pills and maybe escape torture. So that really haunted me. I found it very spooky, but she spoke in a very matter-of-fact and nonchalant voice. My second searing memory in my childhood was the Tet Offensive in '68. I was about 7 or 8. And the fighting was several miles from our neighborhood, and it was door-to-door, hand-to-hand combat. All of Vietnam was actually under siege. And our neighborhood was almost one of the centers of fighting, and it took a while for us to be able to flee from the neighborhood into Saigon, where my father's military headquarters were, and there were bomb shelters there. So I remember hiding in the bomb shelters when there were bombing raids. In 1975, the war ended with South Vietnam losing. So everybody was trying to leave, and you may remember all of the television footage about this. We had a very close family friend, and he had been in Vietnam. He flew back, almost going against the flow of traffic, so to speak. He flew back, adopted me. Officially, I found it out later. Adopted me and took me out, and I lived with him and his family in Avon, Connecticut for several months until my parents were able to leave Vietnam. And they decided to resettle in Virginia. It was about, it's right outside Washington, D.C. So a lot of Vietnamese thought it was a safe place because it's near the capital city. So I went back and lived with them and basically had all of my high school years in Virginia. And my parents' number one mantra was education, education, education. Everything can be lost except your education. So I am part of that to my daughter too. It was my portal into the American dream.
So for me, I think this book is very coming of age because I wrote it around the age of, I guess, the audience. So it's like a diary for me as I grow up. Hopefully you can see me mature as the book goes on. I wrote it when I was 15, 16, 17. But obviously there's the backdrop of the war going on. So obviously I would never want to indicate any positive overture out of trauma. But for me, I think it was actually pretty cool to grow up with my mom as my mom, even as she was still working things out. And it was good because I had a white dad and a Vietnamese mom. So I obviously didn't look Asian. I didn't face any type of discrimination in school the way my mother did, but I still got exposure to the war in a perfect position. I was in kind of like a third person perspective, looking in objectively on how it kind of affected her, but I still got the effects of it onto me because she was raising me based on things she was still working out from the war. So there was, obvious like little things that like most Asian moms do, like the tiger mom. Like I was doing violin and piano really young. I don't know why those two instruments in particular, but since I could hold a violin, she put them in my hands. And math, like 4 or 5 years old, I was doing math really early. But there was less typical things that I think she did that other Asian moms that my friends had weren't doing that she was using to cope. And I think it's because, for example, like she talks about the Tet Offensive. I think that was probably the biggest piece of trauma for her. And she was about 7 at that time. And I think a part of her always stayed that age, because when you go through something super traumatic, I think your body wants to hold on to that innocent piece of yourself. So I always had a best friend growing up. When I was 7, she could also be 7 for me, 8, 9, 10, however many years. And I think the Tet Offensive especially was a big event of betrayal, because even in the war, like the Tet Offensive was, they decided to have a ceasefire and one side still attacked. So it's like, even when you think you're safe, for 1 minute, you're not anymore. So I think that carried through as she raised me. Even when we had settled into a really safe, like gated community, years later, she still thought there was danger all around. I remember when I was about 7, actually, she put me underneath the cabinet of a kitchen sink to fit me under there to see where I could fit. So there was a spot there. She checked the spot in the closet, where can I fit? And she would tell me, like, if there's an invader, you're gonna hide in here. If you hear me dying outside, you're not gonna come out, it's a trap. And I was like, oh my God, she needs help. And then actually it's funny, because a few years after that, we started doing lockdown drills at school because of all the school shootings. And all my friends would have to hide under the desk to practice. And they were like, this is so weird. And I was like, it's a piece of cake. I could sit here all day. So she really did like still have this traces of the war going on in her head. But again, like as I was writing it, I think you see me grow up, because I was still working things out of myself while I was in high school. So for the first time, I think when you have to go into high school and you start needing to just impress other people too, not just yourself and your parents or your mother or whoever, you kind of start resenting how you grew up, especially for me, because my mom had taught me such amazing things like art and history and culture, stuff that she thought was really important. But I don't think that those things help you make friends with other 15-year-old girls when you go into high school. So I really felt very lost. I never really learned how to make friends, especially because her high school experience was really isolating after the war, I think. So it was very hard for me to find my footing. Also, like the book, I think, addresses like body dysmorphia, kind of like for the first time looking in the mirror, like hating every part of yourself when you're that young, and also personality dysmorphia. I remember every day at school feeling like it was the first day and I was a new kid and like everyone hates me. And at the same time, like working out resentment with my mother, because as I was going through a bunch of isolating issues, we were still working things out. And I was also writing the book. Meanwhile, there were things that she told me when I was like 6 relating to her being bullied in school. And even though I wasn't being bullied, it was still like the same kind of isolation. Hers was obviously from racism from the war. And I remember thinking at the time, like, how can you let these people who bullied you to like such an emotional death, like just get away with it? She never went to the principal. She never stood up for herself. And I was angry at the time. At even like 6 years old, I was Googling this girl's name on Facebook that bullied her when she was in high school. And then I realized when I got into school, like I just really wanted to get out. I just wanted to go to college. I just wanted to get away, go to a different town, different people. And I didn't care about like getting back at whoever harassed me or trying to fit in anymore. So I think for the first time, I really related to her and understood like just putting your head down and using kind of education as a way to get out. And so it was really funny, like conflicting so fiercely, as I think she took the reins for me for the lot of things I was going through. Like she took my phone, all out of love, but at the time I didn't see it that way. And I think in a way she still used my high school experiences to work out her own, which was okay. But I think you really see us work through that as we write the book.
And also, I feel like I wish I had been able to relate to Harlan better when she was going through all of this, because even though I also went through a high school experience in America, mine was just so wildly and vastly different from her, from the normal ups and downs of high school experience. And so I couldn't really relate to her. You know, when we arrived in America, basically we were a bunch of losers who had lost the war. And I picked up very early on that America, you know, cared about winners and we were losers. So all of that totally colored my high school experience. So even though she tried to get me to be able to experience some of her high school, her own trauma, it was hard for me to relate to it because I was still seeing high school through a war trauma, and I was thinking, well, she doesn't have war to deal with.
Yeah, and I remember thinking like, how can you escape a war, and how can you raise me in a way where I can understand all of it, but you can't understand like crying over a boy and like not doing so well on a test or something like that. So, but I do think like, even though it was very therapeutic to write the book, it's also very much like a love letter to America in a way for her.
And for sure, also my way of doing a love story for her as well. Our actual act of writing the book was initially really turbulent. It went up and down. I remember that she showed me for the first time her chapter, which we never did again. We never looked at each other's chapters again. But I made one change, which is she had said, my mother screamed, and I edited to, she raised her voice. And it
I was furious.
Yeah, she was furious. So we stopped doing that. We basically just turned in the draft to our editors, and then we were done with it. But in the end, it turned out to be quite harmonious in terms of how we were in sync with each other. So basically, we're hoping that you see the book as sharing with you the experience of what it's like for a refugee to live through the experience, and what America means to refugees, and how that ripples down into a mother-daughter relationship that can be both turbulent and very loving and very close as a result. Thank you. And I look forward to hearing all of my fellow authors as well. Thank you.